willing to learn about this. This is one of the first informational classes that are on cannabis in the state of Ohio right now. There's not many people who can say they went to an educational class for cannabis yet. But here you are, guys. Craig and Heather own the store here. They've been in business for about 14 years now, helping people with everything urban agriculture based. We're not necessarily the people that you contact if you want to grow corn and beans, but we'll help you with anything else. If you have an at-home vegetable garden, whether it be indoor or outdoor, we cater a lot to microgreens and sprouts and stuff like that. There's a lot of chefs that shop here and a lot of growers. There's a lot of products that we have that cater to a lot of things other than cannabis as well. And it's not just indoor supplies that we sell here. There's a lot of outdoor stuff that goes on too. We team up with small growers. We also team up with other grow shops around us. We come together, we buy in bulk to help to keep the prices down for everybody. This is a small mom and pop shop. There's nothing corporate about it. There's a very small base of employees here, and we're very friendly with the customers. There's a lot of personal relationships that go on here, and we want to see you guys succeed. The better you guys grow, the better that we grow, for the bottom line, guys. Today's class, I think this is the first time in my life I've ever seen an actual cannabis plant in here. This is from my boss's basement. This is a Michigan medical patient plant, but it's a home grow plant. It's in stone wool, so there's no soil or anything like that. It has a label on it. It's pruned up beautifully. This plant is not far from being put into the bloom phase to grow the flowers. There's also a display of a little dry bud here to see what it looks like up close and what you're looking for when it comes to ripeness. There's some books up here that I'm used to using throughout my life. I grew up in North Toledo. I'm a native here. I went to the Toledo Public School System. I was a graduate of Woodward High School. I went to college at Owens for urban agriculture. I went right to school with all the other guys that were doing landscape management, golf course management, turf grass management. And I was more into the vegetable side of things the whole time. I got cherry picked out of my greenhouse management class by the teachers to go work in their greenhouses. I learned how to grow tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, all for profit. Hydroponically and organically, both. I worked on some pond management farms in Bowling Green where I learned organic pond management, organic agriculture for profit. We did a berry farm, we did a CSA where customers got a weekly fruit basket of everything off the farm. Other than that, I went to Ohio State University and learned how to grow fish, guys. So I was really big into the aquaponics thing. I was really big into the organics. I wanted to do the fish and the plants. I lived by Lake Erie. It all made sense. So I kind of got my education in it all. I started a little company that started doing labor services to all the greenhouses and the people that needed help, all the farmers that needed a little bit of help, a little bit of time of the year. I would go from greenhouse to greenhouse to greenhouse and learn all this information with other people's money. And so I learned a lot in a little bit of time. I love where I'm at right now, guys. Toledo Indoor Garden's fantastic to me. They're a great place to shop. And we'll always be willing to try to do our best for you. Today's Growing 101. Let's get started, guys. In today's class, we're going to keep it really, really general. I don't want to go too far in depth on anything. I could talk for days on some subjects. We're going to talk about seeds, seed starting. Cannabis is one of the kinds of plants where there's male and female plants. They don't have both parts on the same plant. Obviously, we want to grow the females for medicinal value or anything like that. The males you can grow if you want to for pollen to make seeds with. It's absolutely possible. When you're in indoor agriculture, it's very expensive to grow indoors. It's intensive to grow indoors. A lot of times you want to keep it to the female plants when you're indoors because there's not as much value in the male plant. We're going to talk about the vegetative phase and the flowering phase. So these plants are photosensitive. Generally, if you give them more than 18 hours of daylight, they're never going to grow flowers for you, ever. But it isn't until you shorten the day length into like a 12 hours on, 12 hours off, do they start to put on those flowers. So these plants, they sense that fall. They sense the days getting shorter, and they put the flowers on. And the whole purpose is to make a seed. If you keep the male out of the equation, there's no seed that occurs. We're going to go over harvesting, drying, and curing. We're going to go over water quality, where your pH should be, and what EC means. How to keep a healthy environment in your grow room or greenhouse, or Mother Nature. You can play anyone you want. And then talk about the plant's nutrition, irrigation, biosecurity, and integrated pest management. It comes to keeping your plants clean. Nobody wants to use a medicinal plant that's been sprayed with heavy pesticides or that has been consumed and scattered on by a bunch of bugs either. And also when it comes to molds, mildews, viruses, and things like that, it absolutely can get on your plants. And so when you have an indoor grow area, you want to keep it clean, you want to stay clean, you want to make sure nothing bad happens, because it can cost a lot of money if something bad happens and you got to throw stuff away. Guys, there's some basic facts about the cannabis plant. Obviously, plants, we have perennials and annuals. Cannabis is a herbaceous annual plant. It will die when it comes frost. There's a woody plants and there's herbaceous plants. There's two different types of plants, guys. Woody plants are obviously your trees. They got bark. They store and use their food differently than herbaceous plants do, like a tomato or a pepper or anything like that. And then all the herbaceous plants are separated into two categories. There's monocots and dicots. A monocot is like a blade of grass. It comes up just with one blade. And then dicot comes up with two leaves. Those two leaves that every dicot comes up with are called the cotyledons. Whether it's a watermelon plant, a pepper plant, or a cannabis plant, the cotyledons come up first out of that seed. And then you don't see those true leaves until about 10 days after. And once you start seeing those true leaves, and then you can start to identify the plant. But almost all plants are unidentifiable until you're really used to seeing them. Just by looking at those cotyledons. They don't look anything like the native plant themselves. And then there's two different types of plants. Like I said, there's males and females in different plants, or there's male and female both on the same plant. So monoecious plants and dioecious plants. The dioecious plant is what the cannabis plant is. There's both male and female different plants. Other plants like that are like asparagus has male and female plants. Kiwis have male and females. And there's a few other ones just like that. The monoecious plants, the most famous one is corn. We see the pollen that goes on top of your corn and it falls down and gets the stalks fertilized. Some parts of the plant, guys, that I want to explain and for you to understand. Obviously the stem, there's nodes. When you read about a node or you want this many nodes, that's where that stem and the leaf come together. That's a node. And there's an internode. And a lot of plants have an internode spacing, and that's going to be how far your plant stretches. And so people, especially indoors with restricted ceiling height, like to keep shorter internode spacing. And there's different types of plants that'll stretch a lot more than others. There's leaves. That terminal bud is always that top bud, that bud that has the most energy in it. A lot of times we'll prune our plants to try and send that energy to other parts of the plant in order to make more than just one nice thick cola. Anybody can stop me at any time with questions too. I may go over some stuff that people don't understand as well. For the most part, roots, shoots, nodes, and buds. That's about it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you trim above the node or up behind the node?
And so that's a great question. When you trim and prune these plants, you typically go just above the node.
Okay.
The opportunity being is if you cut above the node too much, there's a small part of that plant that has to then die off all by itself. It can be susceptible to diseases and things like that. So it's a lot of times it's more important to cut right at that node, and it helps the plant to then form a new shoot that comes out of that space there.
Thank you.
Is that for when you're topping it?
Yep.
Above the node?
Topping, pruning, as long as you're in that vegetative phase where you're just trying to grow a big plant that you can prune up as much as you want. You're not really going to hurt the plant.
So it's the same, no matter what branch you kind of want to go above the node?
Yep. And then photosynthesis, guys, that's how plants make their energy. They get energy from the sun. They get energy from CO2 that we breathe out. Okay, and this is just a small depiction of how all that goes. The plant takes in the light, the air, it creates sugars and water vapor. A good depiction on how the roots both need to breathe oxygen and CO2 and take in water. And then minerals too. And when I was a kid growing up, a lot of times I thought you just added water to plants and they grew just fine, and that's just simply not the case. We're spoiled here in Lucas County, Toledo, with our soil. If you go to other places in the world and even the United States, it's much, much harder to grow a plant in the ground than it is here. We have that Lucas County black swamp, sandy loam, great soil here to grow with. We're very spoiled.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Go back to the topping. How many times could you top on one plant?
So as long as that plant has good nutrition and has a good light source, that plant can just keep on regrowing and regrowing and regrowing. Eventually they get tired out, a little bit too woody. They don't grow as vigorous anymore. My suspicion is over time they get some sort of virus, disease, or imbalance of nutrients somehow. And a lot of times we try to identify the nutrient deficiency just by looking at the leaves. Not as easy to do as if you was to send a leaf sample off to a lab and they'll tell you exactly what it's lacking or how to get it back on track. And these are rather short day plants that we typically don't need to keep running for more than a year long or anything like that. So we don't need to send samples off too often in order to keep them going, you know what I mean? But you can keep on cutting those nodes and they'll regrow as long as that plant has good nutrition and stays nice and clean indefinitely for the most part.
Is there a number that you recommend to do?
You know, as far as like having like a mother plant and taking some cuttings from it and making new ones and then letting it regrow, taking more cuttings from it and making new ones, I can say doing that a couple rounds before you would replace that mother plant with one of her cuttings, one of her healthy cuttings, and be a new genetic makeup of that mother plant that would be just as vigorous as what that mother once was. That's the goal. And now, over time, like I said, with viruses and diseases, these plants are highly susceptible. Mosaic viruses that tomatoes get in the fall, tobacco viruses, all kinds of stuff is also transferable to the cannabis plant too, that you wouldn't even know. You take it as a nutrient deficiency, but it's kind of sick and needs replaced. Does that answer your question?
How many times would you recommend?
Maybe 2 to 3 rounds before you get a new one. That sounds about right to me. And now you can still use that same cutting and regrow a new mother and still have that same another 2 to 3 rounds off of another mother. You're never really going to drift or anything like that that they suspect. That's a kind of one of those proven myths in school. Seed selection, guys. There's a lot of people that want to know what to buy or what to try and find. But it's all going to depend on whether you're trying to grow outdoors or indoors. How far north did you come from? Because it gets a lot cooler faster up in northern Michigan. There's a few different kinds of seeds there are. Obviously the indica, the sativa, the ruderalis. The sativa is always the stretchy one. It's always the one that takes a little bit longer in a grow room. Days matter in a grow room. Every day is a set dollar amount. And if you could harvest something 2 weeks before another something that has the same value, you're going to kind of probably stay away from the sativas because they stretch and they take a lot longer to grow. And then the indicas, those are mostly famous for indoor agriculture. Almost everything's a hybrid now between that sativa and indica. But what you're looking for is that short internode spacing, that short day length plant to where we're getting harvest right around that 60-day mark on average. If you can get something that harvests less than 60 days, it's a beautiful thing. But usually you're right around that 60 days on average. That ruderalis is that shorter, stumpier, that one that typically it can flower out whether it's in a 24-hour period or a 12-hour period. It generally from the upper latitudes, like something that would grow in Washington or Alaska or something like that, because it's an auto flower. It's something that's going to flower whether the sun goes down or not. And when they come up with auto flowers, it's just breeding both of these to that ruderalis plant and coming up with an autoflower. Autoflowers are new, they're exciting, they're awesome. They're not as researched yet as what the regular seeds are, and they're not as consistent. If I'm a greenhouse grower and I want multiple rows of something the same, autoflowers is not going to do that for you yet, but I do see that coming in the future. Seed starting, guys, there's many ways to do this. A lot of people talk about the paper towel method where they'll soak their seeds for a couple hours, or they'll put their seeds in a paper towel in a Ziploc bag for 12 hours. That's all good. You could use the potting soil, peat moss, soil blocks, that stone wool or cocoa coir. It's all good, guys. Just some of it dries back a little bit faster than others. Seedlings need to stay wet. You get a seedling too dry and it's not going to come back. Especially older seeds need soaked a little bit more. The seed has life stored in it, and that life is still going on, even though the seed is on a shelf somewhere or in your dresser drawer somewhere. And a lot of times, the older seeds need soaked a little bit longer in order to come out all right. Don't give up on them. But you got to start clean and you got to stay clean. If you're soaking your seeds, you soak them for more than 24 hours. There's other things that can grow in that water. Molds, mildews, pathogens that can then hurt that seedling. So I really try to stay away from soaking more than 24 hours unless you're using a peroxide or something like that in your water, or something to help keep it sterilized. People quite often don't want to have chlorine in their water when they're feeding their plants. Not a bad thing to soak your seeds in though, because it'll kind of keep the bacteria at bay while that seedling's trying to get out. High humidity and low light. We sell all these big high intensity LED lights. You don't need those for the seedlings. The little smaller watt lights work just fine. A $50 light is just fine for seedlings versus a $600 light. High humidity generally is until them roots get established, guys, until you start to see some good root mass where the plant's not going to dry out too much. So the high humidity is for a small period of time. If your little seedling comes up very stringy and wants to fall over, it probably doesn't have enough light. If your seedling comes up very short and very stout and doesn't really want to grow at all, it probably has too much light. And so it's all about kind of looking at that plant, reading that plant. If they come up real stringy and want to fall over, you can stake them up with a little toothpick if you want to, or something like that. Something to help them stay a little bit sturdy, keep them up off the soil until they can get a little bit more sturdy. Airflow helps keep that stalk a little bit thicker too. So a lot of people, if you keep your dome on your seedlings for too long, they can get stringy like that too. A heating pad underneath your seedlings can make them go stringy as well. So a lot of times once the seed sprouts, you can take that heating pad out and it'll keep them plants from getting up and falling over. Some people that are unsuccessful with the seed starting, that's quite often what it is.
You're saying it's okay to start seeds in tap water then?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Yep. When it comes to seed depth, when you plant your seeds in the ground, I'm a big fan of just putting my seeds in the ground. A lot of the seeds in this sort of sector are very high value seeds. These seeds are costing you $10 plus per seed. You may want to do the paper towel method to keep things a little bit cleaner. I'm famous for the peat moss or soil blocks. They have little peat moss plugs that they sell here that come 50 in a bag. You can put a seed right on the top of it. But seed depth, no matter what, when it comes to planting sunflowers or cannabis, it's twice the diameter of the seed. So if a seed is a half an inch, then you want to plant it 1 inch deep into the ground. That's the general rule across the board. So cannabis seeds are, an 1/8 of an inch. You'll probably plant that about a 1/4 inch under the ground, and that's where it's supposed to be.
One thing too about putting seeds in napkins, don't open your napkin super fast, because sometimes they'll throw roots out and they'll intertwine in the napkin.
You end up injuring them.
And you'll bust that tap.
Yeah, they're very delicate.
Yeah. That's one of those things.
Yeah, if you do let them go in that paper towel for too long, they can sprout some roots and start to get root hairs intertwined with the paper towel, and you can do some damage to some high dollar seeds that way too. Don't leave them in the paper towel too long.
I've damaged thousands of dollars of seeds. I just wanted to keep you guys informed of that.
You said when it's long and stringy, you said it was more or less light?
Usually that means it doesn't have enough light.
Okay, yeah, it's more.
Yep. doesn't have enough light, doesn't have enough airflow, maybe too much heat in the root zone it's trying to crawl away from. All of those are will help keep that stem a little bit sturdier. And then we talk about the cotyledons on all these dicot seeds. Those true leaves are coming up right here in the middle. But those cotyledons have stored food in them. And so you don't necessarily have to feed a seed right away. They have stored food in them to get them up, to get them sprouted. There's a few days of food in there pretty easily. You don't really have to start feeding any plant until you start to see those true leaves come up. And even in this scenario, you can't really tell that those are the true leaves yet. You can't really identify those as a cannabis leaf yet. So you don't necessarily have to feed this yet at all. It's not in the stage where I want it to start eating yet. All right, things to consider for your success, guys. This the goals that you have in mind. Some people are doing this for way different reasons than others. Some people want to make seeds. Some people want to stay outdoor, indoor. Some people just want some weekend material for their friends. Some people really have an aunt that's a cancer patient or something like that. You know what I mean? So there's many different goals out there. You just got to kind of figure out what they are. You can relay them to us here at the shop, and we'll help steer you in the right direction. How much space you have and what you're doing. The plant count, I try to really stay away from laws and politics as much as possible. I don't even ask. But the plant count here in Ohio currently is 6. So just know that. And by saying that, you can grow a bigger plant and get a bigger yield if that's what you're looking for, or you can grow 6 very small plants and get a smaller, more boutique yield too. It can be done many different ways, guys. You could have a 3 plants in your flowering area, and you could have 3 plants that you're holding back to make cuttings off of, or flowering or something like that as well. Your environment control, guys, that's going to be the key to success. The best thing you can do for your plants is control the environment they live in. You got to play Mother Nature for them. If you're in a greenhouse, there's your roof vents, your fans, and your roll-up sides, because greenhouses heat up so much. In your basement, you're going to need air exchange. They need fresh air. If they're not getting fresh air, you're going to need CO2 for them, because they run out fairly quickly. You're going to need air movement, so you'll need some fans to move some air around and play Mother Nature that way. And so environmental control, you'll need to manage the temperature and the humidity as well. And it's all about how much you want to get into it. Most places in the air that you breathe are just fine for a plant. If you want to speed the process up, if you're looking for more yield or more quality, you're going to really kind of dial in those temperatures and humidities more and kind of take it into consideration.
What is the recommended temperature?
I'm so glad you asked that, because the next slide,
Oh, okay.
we talk about too cold, just right, and too hot. For the most part, this is just the vegetative phase that we're talking about right now. It's that phase where these plants are in 18 hours of daylight. They're not putting on flowers by any means. We're growing mass right now. We're trying to fill out our space that we have to grow, whether it be the light or space outside in the sun or in a greenhouse. But usually, if you get into the 60s and the low 60s, things slow down a lot. You're more susceptible to molds and mildews at those lower temperatures. And so you try to keep the temperatures above those a little bit. Usually the lights that you use if you're indoor can heat things up a little bit to be over 60 unless you're outside and it's an unheated environment. But just right is between that 73, 83. You get up into the higher 80s and things slow down as well. And so you go from this 65 degrees up to this 85 degrees, things get dramatically faster, things speed up, the microbial environment multiplies dramatically, the nutrient uptake intensifies, and all the way until you get up to this too hot. Now the plant's trying to cool itself down, and it's not working for you anymore either. And so you try to stay away from that 90 degrees, and you try to stay over that 70 degrees. And as long as you're in that vegetative phase, that's all right. If you're in a facility somewhere and the boss is hounding you to get to the next growth phase, then you're going to speed things up a little bit. If you're really not worried about it, and you don't have the tools to do it, it's more than welcome to go an extra week in your room to get as big as you wanted it in 4 weeks as it got in 3 weeks at a more hotter environment. You're paying for that somewhere or another. They talk about humidity in the vegetative phase, guys. These plants like humidity. to an extent. Too humid and it could lead to molds and mildews as well. Not humid enough, and then the plant kind of struggles to breathe, and the plant struggles to pull up nutrients as well. So too dry is bad, too humid is also bad. We talk about things where these initials are. These get a little bit more advanced, but something that to keep in mind, and I'm also going to show you some charts to kind of depict it. They talk about VPD, which is the vapor pressure deficit. It's basically the air that we breathe and how easy is it for the plant to pull up water and transpire it through its leaves into the atmosphere. If we're at 90% humidity out here, the plant's going to kind of struggle to throw its transpiration out there. And so you want, it's a balance between temperature and humidity to get the correct vapor pressure deficit to make your plants run as fast as they can run. And then your PPFD is your light intensity. These are measurements that scientists use to measure the light. Most of the time it's for the LEDs. Do you have a question? No, we're good. But the light intensity matters, guys. And all these lights that you buy now are new LED lights. They're new technology. They're not like the old high pressure sodiums that we used in the past. They're not as hot. They're not as intense. They don't cost as much to run. But you can do damage with your plants by having them too intense. It wasn't really that easy to do with the 1,000-watt high pressure sodiums, but with these LEDs, you can do harm more than good by turning the lights all the way up. And so most of the time there's a measurement. It's called PPFD. It's a measurement in micromoles per meter squared per second. Don't even have to worry about that. Just remember that number and where it needs to be with the tool that you're using to measure it. We sell all these light measuring devices and all that stuff here too. But for the most part, in the seedling stage, that measurement's 100, 200. In that vegetative phase, you can crank your lights up a little bit while these lights have dimmers to that 200 to 500 mark. And then in that blooming stage, when you're really trying to bulk up, you're really trying to make that plant put weight on, you can really crank your lights up. The limiting factor is probably most likely always going to be CO2. So when you introduce CO2, it also lets you crank your lights up a little bit more. And you can tell by the way your plants are responding. You know, is the plant still preaching and reaching for the light, or is the plant kind of saying it's had enough? You know what I mean? There's many ways to tell. And some cannabis plants are going to really take the light, love the light. Some of them are not going to like the light at all.
This is for autos, our photos. It's basically all the same.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Definitely, basically most of the same between autos and photos right now. We're gonna not get too far into autos because I'm just clueless on the research. I'm a fan of autos. Right now, the consistency for me isn't there. But man, I also feel like the longer light schedule, the better for autoflowers. Had a lot of guys come in and show me their pictures of their autoflower plants, and it's the guys that are running 24 hours of light that are winning with the autoflowers. I promise you that.
Gotcha.
I had a question on the light.
Yeah.
So if you have an LED setup already with the LED light, you have to add UV light, like a black light or UV or anything to it?
No,
Or
you
is
should be
that
just
light-
fine. Yep. A lot of there's actually no lights in our store have the UV in them. You have to pay for that extra if that's what you want. And
Is it beneficial to have extra?
it's kind of a debate. You know, some people will say absolutely yes, and some people will say, not too much, especially for the money that you're putting into it or something like that. Personally, me, I've added UV bars to my fixtures at home. Do I see much of a difference? I don't know. Not enough to be confident enough to try and sell them like that. They don't make or break the crop by any means. So regular LEDs that are full spectrum are just fine. Now, some people who really get into the LED light, guys, they will pay extra to be able to dial in more blues and more reds. And they'll get online and get with these lighting companies and download new schedules where they'll have a sunrise and a sunset where the light goes to intense and then dims down before the end of the day and then gets more red as the night goes on too. So there's new research out that shows maybe the last 2 hours of your flowering cycle should be more red than anything to increase things. I'm not a lighting specialist by any means, but I do think that whoever is looking for a new light should look into the company and what they have to say about their lights themselves rather than the opinion of somebody selling you the light. other than like what experience does the other customers have with these lights. You know, and just kind of get the people that make the lights and question them before you question somebody that's selling the light. Anyways, this is also a kind of a light schedule or light meter. It shows you, it's a PPFD chart. It shows you that you have in your home north-facing windows, don't get much sunlight. You're not looking at very many micromoles to grow plants with at all. If you remember, the seedling and cutting stage is right around here to this 100 to 200 mark. And so it isn't until you get, you know, up until full sun, which is 2,200 micromoles, you can see the intensity of where light goes from seedlings and cuttings all the way up to the average plant growth, and then full sun plants, citrus trees, eucalyptus trees, equator-based, you know, flora and fauna. This is also explains the PPFD and why you should need a dimmer on your LED light. There's a seedling phase, a vegetative phase, and a flowering phase. Basically, small, medium, and large. Not as intense, medium intense, fully intense on your LED light. You can kind of see where your plants need to be during what stage they need to be at. If you're up into the 900s on your micromoles, you better be putting some CO2. For the most part, your plants are not going to be doing too good, in my experience. This right here, guys, we talked about the vapor pressure deficit and how easy it is for plants to pick up the nutrients and put them into the atmosphere. And this is entirely based off relative humidity and the temperature of your room. All right, and they talk about where this measurement is made in kilopascals. There's the unit of measurement. Where it should be in the early veg stage, the early flower, and then the mid-flower stage. And so you increase this vapor pressure deficit as the growth phase moves on, just like you would intensify the lights. And so it gives the plants, I want to get out of the way too, for anybody that wants to take a picture of this chart, and you can type in VPD chart anywhere on Google and it'll pop right up. This is kind of going above and beyond for your grow facility. This is kind of seeing how fast your plants can race. Pay attention to that VPD and try and stay in where it needs to be as much as possible. And it's fairly simple to do, guys. If you're at 79 degrees and you're in the mid to late flower stage, you want to be right around 60 to 50% humidity. And it's just a balance between temperature and humidity.
I have a question on your last slide. How do you add oxygen or CO2 to an environment?
So there's different ways you can add CO2 to the environment. On a small scale, you can use a tank of CO2 that you can get from a gas supply company, and we sell hoses and regulators to kind of keep that in check, kick it on and off.
Okay.
On a larger facility, you use what's called a CO2 burner, where it puts off a lot of heat and you hooks up the natural gas or propane, but you can add CO2 to your facility with a burner as well, the bigger facilities.
Okay.
For a small tent setting or a closet setting at home, a 6-plant scenario, we sell, it's actually mushroom mycelium in a bag. And the byproduct from the growing mushrooms in that bag is CO2. Okay. So we just encourage you to hang a bag in your grow facility, and it'll elevate the CO2 in there.
Cool beans.
Yep. The flowering phase, guys. This is kind of where things get a little bit cool, and a little bit more intricate. There's different stages of the flowering phase. There's early, mid, and late flowering. And like I said, this flowering stage is on average right around 60 days. Some people get really attached to a strain that they're growing, even though it's a 12-week strain. They love it. It's fantastic. Everybody buys it every time. You just kind of have to balance out what it costs you to run your machine for 12 weeks versus 8 to 10 weeks. It could be dramatically more money. But during the early flowering stage, guys, your plants, they stretch. They stretch like crazy. And there's different products out there to help that stretch, but your plants will almost double in size when you put them into the flowering phase. And so for people that are in a tent scenario, they grow these big plants, and then they want to flip them over to the flowering stage, and they never really thought about how much stretch is going to take place. They end up having plants that grow up into their lights. They're trying to prune things, bend things over, cut things off that they spent so much time growing in the first place, just to get back underneath that light because they have low ceilings or something like that. So just always remember that that plant is going to stretch to about double in size. Some stretch a lot more, some stretch a lot less. The mid-flowering stage after that stretch is right when that bulking phase starts. That's when you start to grow the flowers. That's when you start to see the trichomes start to grow. You get some of those aromas. And then you go through about 3 weeks of that bulking phase before you start to get into that ripening phase. Things are going to thicken up. Things are going to tighten up. You're going to see those trichomes kind of develop and all the smells come out. Your neighbors will knock on your door if you don't have something to scrub the smell, just to see if you got a pet skunk or something. Temperatures can be a little bit higher in the flowering phase, but when you get too high on your temperatures in the flowering phase, it starts to ruin your terpene profiles or your smells, and it can also ruin the structure of your flowers. If your temperatures get too high in your flowering phase, your buds will end up getting real loose and spongy. Not sought after in the market by any means. And also, if your temperatures get too high, the smell and the taste from those flowers can actually evaporate into the air. It volatilizes. And so during this process, it's very important to not get too hot. And as the flowering phase moves on, you kind of reduce humidity as well. And so in a late flowering, you can see how you kind of reduce that humidity. You want to be able to control that. If your humidity's too much in late flower, you start to grow molds and mildews inside your flowers and in your buds, and nobody wants to smoke or consume or eat molds and mildews. So you really want to keep your environment in check, guys. You really want to keep your temperature and your humidity in check in order to keep a nice clean product in the end. We talk a little bit more about your vapor pressure deficit, and I can refer back to that chart, and then your PPFD. Obviously, I underlined here anywhere between 500 and 1,000 micromoles. We sell light meters here, guys. We even rent them out to you for free. You'll have to pay for the meter and then bring it back. We'll give you all your money back. But we have a store rental where you can go home and you can put this light meter under your light with a tape measure, and you can say at 18 inches, I'm reading at 500 micromoles. That's where I need to be. And so if you're worried about where my light should be, how intense my light is, we have a free store rental scenario for a light meter for you to take home and figure that out.
I have a question. If you're growing indoors and your humidity is too high, is it fine to run a dehumidifier?
It is. Yep. Just keep in mind that dehumidifier also adds heat to the room. And so you're going to be experiencing spikes in temperature with that dehumidifier working. And keep that in mind because you don't want to get too hot either. There's a fine balance that you have to ride there, whether you have air conditioning or can cool things down by just using an exhaust fan or something like that. All that's available here too. But yeah, air conditioning, battling a dehumidifier is well known in a grow room because the dehumidifiers heat up a lot. Now in a home environment, a little smaller dehumidifiers, not so much, but we also sell big giant ones that facilities put up in their rafters too.
Is it best to put it in your tent or can you leave it outside your tent?
If you're at a bigger tent, like a 4x8 and bigger, 10x10 or something, maybe put it in. But otherwise, I would have it outside. I would have it in the room and try and manage the room that the tent is in. And then have an inline fan in that tent or somewhere around that's doing air exchange. It's pulling air out of that tent and putting it somewhere. And so ultimately, the air that you're managing is always going in that tent and kind of keeping it in check that way. That would be a kind of a good way to do it. Otherwise, you experience a lot of spikes in temperature and humidity with that dehumidifier kicking on and off in that little environment. Guys, next is we don't often see this because a lot of times we use clones in order to keep things kind of consistent, but sexing your plants. Everybody who wants to start seeds is going to have to do this. If you buy feminized seeds, I would still be looking out for this. I'm just not as big of a confidence and believer in feminized seeds as I probably should be, but still be looking out for this. This doesn't really occur until you start to get into that flowering phase. The first 10 days probably, you'll start to see new growth occurring at the nodes. And this is obviously a male. This is obviously a female. This is kind of one of the easiest ways to tell is these little sacs here. They look like they might contain seeds, but this is actually the pollen. And the pollen from this, getting right on that, will create a seed every time.
Some of you guys that got those seeds that were up here from SoFem, some of them are autoflowers, some are fem, some are red.
Very cool.
Plain white packs are regulars. Some of them that got the logos on them, those are regs. If you got these, this is a cross that I made, those are regular as well.
Always keep that in mind, guys. Even if it says feminized, keep an eye on it, please. This is another, but at a smaller growth stage of the depiction between a male and a female plant. You can really see the little balls on a small scale, little sacs of pollen growing here. And then this is brand new growth here. This is clearly a female. Anytime you see those two little stigmas coming out, clearly a female. And sometimes, very rarely, these plants can express traits of both the male and the female. You put them through enough stress, and you can start to get pollen that grows on your female plant. So, it's always important to know what that looks like. Keep an eye out for it. It's not highly sought after to get flour with seeds in it. It's not. A lot of people can't take that to market, or a lot of people can't really use that as easily with what they're doing, whether it be baking or smoking or anything like that. So trying to keep seeds out of the product is a mainstay for something that's going to be grown, especially you're putting a lot of time and money into. So identifying those male parts is very important. Always going to show up within the first few weeks of that 12 and 12 phase. These are just kind of different parts of the plant that we talk about. The cola, that's what we want to grow. That's what weighs on a scale. That's what holds value. The fan leaves are usually the big leaves coming off the plant. They're like solar panels. You don't want to rip them all off, guys. But it's sometimes important to take back some of these fan leaves to let the light penetrate more, to let the air move through a lot easier. And as you can see on this plant right here, it's been trimmed up quite a bit. And so there was leaves all the way down each one of these branches. And everything on this plant has been cleaned up, and it's ready for its flowering phase, in my opinion. This is ready to go. It's been cleaned up perfectly nice to where you're not going to get anything but big colas coming out of the top and call it a day. You can have probably 6 of these underneath every light that you have in order to kind of fulfill out the whole light. A light that covers a 4x4 area. The stem, and then sugar leaves, guys. Sugar leaves and the calyx. This takes place a lot when you're growing and kind of observing what you're doing. People look for a large calyx to leaf ratio. It helps out when it comes to trimming. So if you can have something that grows a lot more buds than it does leaves, you're kind of in the good right now. Because if it takes twice as long to trim it up, it's going to really cost a lot more money and not be as highly sought after. Leaves don't smoke very well. They're very harsh. That's what makes you cough, along with not a good, clean, flushed product. So a lot of times if you're coughing real heavy off the smoke, it's because there's too many leaves in it. Most likely pre-rolls and stuff like that. There's always a defoliation process that takes place in the flowering phase. Just like I was talking about cleaning this plant up, you can see the difference here on the left and the right. That's the same exact plant. It's just been defoliated. And that really, really helps, guys. It helps the airflow get through the canopy, stopping from pest and disease. It helps the plant grow more flower sites because the light penetration goes so much deeper. And so when it comes to kind of getting the better bang for your buck, this really, really pays off. It's a pertinent step. It's usually done around the 3rd week of the flowering period. If we flower for 10 weeks, we'll say day 21, I want to do a defoliation. Some people will also go in at day 40 or day 50 and do a defoliation. It kind of just really depends on what you're growing and your style of growing. If you're a lot more organic, you'll probably keep more of those leaves because they store food as well. But if you're feeding and injecting food into these roots daily, you don't necessarily need that food stored on the plants and in those leaves. Water quality. Moving on, guys. It's always best to start with clean filtered water. It's not very ideal to use your rainwater, especially indoors. You can use it outdoors all you want. I'm about it, especially in an organic environment. But if you're trying to really control that root zone and keep any harmful things from growing, you're going to start with clean, fresh water. Also, in the aspect of you trying to control an environment that's actually living down here. This root zone has living microbes, bacteria, fungi. It has some stuff going on down there. And in order to keep the healthy stuff healthy and the bad stuff gone, you want to make sure your water is very, 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 very clean. Question?
So, for example, I live out in the country and I have well water.
Mm-hmm.
How would I handle that?
That is a great question. It is a great question. And we sell a series of different stages of water filters that you could use in your home. And a lot of it depends on your source water. If you're a well water, you're going to need a little bit more intense filtration than you would if you were in city water. And depending on where you're from, a lot of times it's good to get somebody from a water filter company out to your house, do a free test, try and sell you on some $5,000 system to filter your water. But at least you know where you're sitting, what's wrong with your water, and what needs to be done in that process. We have cheap and easy filters that are easy for city water to filter, and then we have what's called like a reverse osmosis system, which would really the price is a little more. You get a little bit less flow out of it for clean water. There's wastewater too that they put out, which a lot of people don't really like. But ultimately, that's one way to get the cleanest, best water is run it through a reverse osmosis filter, and then maybe a pre-filter in your case to get it through one filter before it even goes into that reverse osmosis filter to try and strip anything from it that's coming from that well, calcium, iron, lime, or anything like that, depending on where you're located at. No problem. Water quality, so let's start with some good filtered water, guys, and then a lot of times before we deliver water to our plants, we take a look at the pH. The pH for your water, it's basically how easy is it for your plants to absorb the water. Your pH is on a scale from like 1 to 10. And so if your pH gets a little bit too high or a little bit too low, I can give my plant all the nitrogen in the world and the plant's not going to be able to use it at all. And so I see these deficiencies, I want to feed more, but really I just need to adjust my pH. And so your EC also, EC is electrical conductivity. It measures how much nutrients are in the water total. So it's not going to tell me I have this much phosphorus or this much potassium. It's going to say all of it together is this number right here. And so it's up to you and the nutrition that you're using, the nutrient company that you choose to kind of trust their formula to give you everything you need to feed these plants right. And then that EC meter is going to tell you how strong that solution is. Some of the best growth facilities here, especially commercial facilities, they monitor this pH and EC all the time, every day, and they monitor it in a few different ways. Most likely, the home grower or people like me, I'm measuring it before I deliver it to the plants. All these facilities not only measure it, deliver it to the plants, they also have little meters that they stick in the root zone that can give them those parameters in the root zone. And then they also measure what's coming out of the bottom of the plant when you water it. When you water, you're always looking for roughly 10 to 20% runoff throughout the day coming out the bottom of that. And people test that as well. So you can see if you put the solution in at this rate and it's coming out at this rate, did it use it, did it not use it, and kind of what went wrong between there. So you can figure out if you can ramp up the feed or slow down the feed, change the pH or anything like that by keeping track of all those parameters. For the most part, guys, though, if you're putting it in right, and you're doing the proper amount of runoff that the feed schedule is telling you to do, and you're working with your nutrient company, you're following the labels and the directions, you're not going to have any problem with your substrate EC or your runoff EC or pH. Guys, this is an example of a pH chart. We had these up front on the counter. We try to school everybody on them. Every line that you're looking at is a mineral used by your plants. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium. And you can see that your numbers of your pH chart are here. You try to always stay between that 6 to 6.5, you know, maybe a little bit lower, a little bit higher, but somewhere in this range right here is where everything's available. And so you can see if your pH falls a little bit low, your nitrogen becomes unavailable, your phosphorus becomes unavailable. If your pH runs a little bit high, now all of a sudden I'm seeing iron and magnesium deficiencies, calcium deficiencies. And so you really want to keep that pH in a good zone in order for all the nutrition to be used by the plant. These charts are ever famous. All your little pH water quality meters that you use should be calibrated sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, but for sure monthly by the company. If you don't calibrate that thing monthly, it could be a little bit off and you're just going to be working yourself back from nowhere. Plant nutrition, guys, there's so many different brands of nutrients in this store. You can kind of use any one of them that kind of suits you the best. For the most part, it's going to be what you want to use for a media. How often do you want to water? How much do you trust the company for the plant that you're growing? What kind of relationships you have. But you can use an organic system of growing. You can use a synthetic system of these bottled nutrients all mixed together. Or you could use a hybrid of the both. There's a lot of people that will use highly synthetic nutrients, but also introduce microbes and bacteria to help increase taste and smell. So there's many different ways that you could do this plant nutrition thing. For the most part, guys, every one of these brands has a schedule. They have directions on what to do and how to do it. You had some laying up here, but follow the directions. Get on the website of any nutrient company that you have. Because you'll find way more information on their website than you will on the label for the bottle. There's all kinds of different media options. When I say media, it's the soil, it's what the roots are in. So I have friends, dear friends of mine that grow in buckets of water. Their roots are in that water all the time. And then I have many friends, also some of my closest friends use organic soils. Where they're good thick soils, you're only watering once every other day. And so you can kind of cut it any way you want to cut it. Everybody to each his own. Every grower is not wrong. You can do anything you want. For the most part, guys, the organic soils, they're thicker, they're more nutrient packed, they have nutrients inside of them, and then they need to be broken down by the microbes and bacteria. You need to play the microbe game and grow healthy soil, and then that will grow a healthy plant for you. Peat moss stays a little bit wetter, cocoa coir stays a little bit drier. That stone wool or that grodan that people use dries out really fast. That's what this is. By the end of the day, this plant will need water or it will be wilting tomorrow morning, I guarantee it. This stuff holds a lot of air and it also holds a lot of water. But you will need almost an electronic watering system to be able to keep this thing going. Or else you're going to be down in your closet or your room a couple times a day trying to add water to that. So the clay pebbles, the leca, they're also very popular. They're popular in the water systems that people use. Perlite, which is the little white balls that you see in the potting soil. I've seen a lot of people grow in perlite all by itself. It's possible. Once again, you're going to need some irrigation to make that happen. But people mix that perlite with the cocoa, they mix that perlite with the peat moss, they come up with something that they're comfortable with for air and water capacity. Feed schedules. This is just a makeshift example of a feed schedule I just drug offline. But this is a good example of a feed schedule for you guys to see. Every brand of nutrients has this schedule. And this schedule talks about a vegetative phase, it talks about a blooming phase, it talks about how many hours of light you should have on during that phase. It has the exact nutrients that you should use, how many milliliters per gallon you should use, and then what you should use during what week of the grow. For instance, all the sample bottles that you guys got today, there's a green bottle and a red bottle. The green bottle's used in the vegetative phase, and then as you move into that blooming phase, you can see how the green bottle falls off, and now you start using the red bottle. And so you kind of get away from the nitrogen and the vegetative growth, and you get more into the phosphorus and potassium, the flower producing nutrients. And there's other there's other nutrients you can add along the way, like calcium and magnesium, that are going to help with that bulking, that taste, that smell. And then all the way to the end, they make one product that they put on the very last week called ClearX. It's in every company makes a product just like it. It's to help get rid of all the nutrients in that root zone. It's to help create the plant that's going to get cleaner inside for a better harvest and a better smoke. Always follow your feed schedules. This feed schedule's not going to be the cure-all for every plant. The opportunity for using this feed schedule is getting an idea of what that nutrient company is doing for you. And then if you continue to grow the same plant over and over by taking small cuttings, regrowing them, and growing the same plant over and over, you can kind of figure out what your plant can take and what it can't. You can add more or take away from. You can say, I know that at week 3 I could push the limits a little harder this time, and you could do that. So it's important to follow that feed schedule, but know and understand that your plant may use something different than that feed schedule, and kind of dial it in a little bit. Get better and better every time. The ripening phase, there's your 10-week on average, sometimes 12 weeks, sometimes longer. But what you're looking for and what you will need is a magnifying glass to see it. There's a small magnifying glass up here. We don't sell these, but we sell smaller, cheaper ones. This is an Amazon one here that's a little bit over $100 probably. But what you're looking for is this amber color in these trichrome heads. That establishes ripened flowers. That'll tell you that there's almost some degradation going on. So you don't want your whole crop to get this amber color. It's a sign of degrading. But once it starts to get these milky and starts to see some of these amber colors, you're ready for harvest. That's it. You achieved it. You're done. Harvesting, drying, and curing. You made it. Congratulations, right? The whole rule for this harvesting and the rule for it all is everybody calls it the 60 and 60. You're looking to hang dry these plants, whether they're already trimmed or whether they have yet to be trimmed, at 60 degrees, 60% humidity. That's the deal. And that's going to be 60 degrees is a little bit cooler to ensure that you keep your taste and your smells. Remember I said they'll evaporate if you get too hot? That'll happen when it's drying and curing as well. And so 7 to 10 days hanging at that 60 and 60, and then another 7 to 10 days in like a big bin or an environment where the little small dry buds can match the same water content as the big buds, and everything kind of evens out the same. So there's a process of putting it in a jar and doing air exchange and burping, trying to get everything even, Steven, not too wet, and get that good aromas to come out before you actually seal it up in a jar for quite some time if you want to. But you could do wet trimming, guys. You could do dry trimming. It's kind of a preference thing. In this picture up here, they're wet trimming. They'll trim those and then they'll hang them like this. This top left picture is the same exact picture, but they haven't trimmed anything yet. It's a commercial scale. This takes a lot of time. And a lot of times, in order to get everything even, this all has to be done at once. Whereas in a scenario like this, you can kind of take your time and have a crew go through this as it dries out and kind of store it that way. And if I only had a little tent of weed to harvest, I'm probably trimming it like this. If I have a big giant room to harvest, I'm probably trimming it a little bit more like that. But always keep in mind, the more that you can take the leaves off in the end and have nothing but a good flower in the end, the more smoother smoke it's going to be overall.
Now, when you're curing,
Mm-hmm.
does it matter if you use a plastic container or else if you use glass jars?
It's a preference type thing. It really is. The new plastic containers that you do use, I would suggest, washing them, wiping them out with some alcohol or something like that. Because you can open up new plastic containers and get a plastic smell out of them, and sometimes that'll migrate to your flower. They make liners, like a crock pot liner or a turkey bag, big bin liners. You can line your bins or plastic with a bag if you want to. That'll help out a lot. I'm a preference of glass. I love big glass jars. They look beautiful, especially when they're full of flour. But you absolutely, I have big plastic bins that I use as well. Big Rubbermaid totes, just to even everything out.
I got a real quick question
Yeah.
while you're on curing. I was just gonna ask you that what you thought about jars. I've been seeing a lot about Grove bags. Have you heard of those? Do you still prefer jars over everything?
I do. I still
Okay.
prefer jars. Now, Grove bags are a fantastic product. They're an over-glorified Ziploc bag also. You are not going to dry and cure in a Grove bag
Okay.
by any means.
Gotcha.
Any means. It's a Ziploc bag, and it's a lot more expensive than a Ziploc bag.
I
But it's
wasn't
cool.
sure if it maintained the humidity somehow.
It does
or
not.
what.
And
No?
it says that it does, and
Okay.
it does not by any means.
Gotcha.
There's nothing in that Grove bag.
So
that's-
basically just jars and humidity meters.
jars, little humidity meters. We sell little digital humidity guides and moisture content readers. For the most part, if that stem can crack and it's not too flimsy, you're more than welcome to jar that up. You're looking for that crunch. A lot of times after that 7 to 10 days, the outside of your buds will be pretty crunchy while the inside is quite wet still, and you just can't tell. And that's the process of that burping, that curing, bringing it all together in a bin and kind of getting things to even out. And then that takes another 7 to 10 days before you can then probably seal it up pretty good for a while if you want. And all that is super relative, guys. You go up into northern Michigan, especially this last winter, and humidity's always really high up there. So depending on where you're from too, and if you're harvesting during the winter time when your heater's running in your house a lot, things will dry out a lot faster when your heater's running. And if it's the springtime and we're getting April showers, things are going to dry out a lot slower unless you're managing that humidity pretty good. We're coming up on some of the last of this, guys, before we can open this up to discussion, questions and answers. But I want to talk a little bit about biosecurity, IPM. There's a product in this store called IPM. They totally cheated off the name IPM. It stands for Integrated Pest Management. It's used in greenhouses worldwide. It's not necessarily one certain spray called IPM. It is a series of steps that you take to make sure everything stays clean, disease-free. It's up to you to protect your grow. It's highly, highly valuable grow that costs a lot of money. And so you should come up with a system that you use to keep it clean, i.e. not letting your friends go in there, not going over your buddy's grow and then coming over to your grow, not taking plants from all your buddies and thinking that they're going to be clean. A lot of bad things happen that way.
Don't use the same scissors.
Don't use the same scissors. Use alcohol a lot. Wear gloves a lot. Me personally, I don't even like to touch my plants with my hands. I'll put on gloves every day I go in my rooms, and that's just what I like to do. I've been through molds, mildew problems before. I've really spent a lot of money on trying to get rid of them, and I don't ever want to introduce stuff like that again, because if you have to throw away a crop, it is one of the most hurtful things that you will ever do. It is not lettuce that you're throwing in the garbage. And so it's important to have a system in place, guys. It protects you, it protects your investment, not just for molds, mildews, and pathogens, but fire extinguishers and stuff too, guys. We're using a lot of intense electricity, a lot of hot equipment, and stuff can happen. And I've seen lights explode. I've seen ballast get burned up. I've seen water drip down on lights and bad things happen. So, keeping fire extinguishers or automatic sprinklers or anything like that. Sticky traps, guys. Those little yellow sticky cards you see in every greenhouse. You got a question? A generator for backup for sure, especially this last year with all the windstorms and everything we had. There was a lot of people that went a few days without power, and it sucks. But sticky traps also, guys, if you put these sticky traps throughout your grow, these bugs are attracted to these colors, yellow or blue in the greenhouse. And you come up with an idea of, if I see more than this many gnats on my sticky trap, now it's time for me to do an application of something or take another step. And so you kind of see these problems coming. You see the ups and downs of what you're playing the game of Mother Nature. So you will be doing a probably different maintenance sprays to keep things clean. These aren't pesticides or anything like that. They're more like peroxides and natural fungicides to keep bugs and mildews and molds down. Because let's face it, guys, in any environment where you have high humidity, a lot of light, and a lot of nutrients, you're going to grow something other than plants. You're going to be growing mildews, you're going to be growing algae and gnats and things like that.
Would you recommend like a disinfecting clean of your room between?
Oh yeah. More than that even. A complete clean out in between grows is definitely required to keep things going clean. There's stuff that you could spray on the walls like a bleach solution, everything, all your equipment, isopropyl alcohol works really well. But in between each grow, you're going to clean fans, you're going to clean humidifiers, you're going to clean nutrient reservoirs, you're going to clean it all.
Quick question, since you mentioned walls. Would you suggest if you're doing a new build, going with like a vinyl wall covering, in the Downs bathroom?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. I think they call it like FRP. It's fiberglass reinforced plastic.
Awesome.
Yep, and it's what they use, kitchens and bathrums, high humidity environments,
I mean, I
easy
go
to clean.
stainless steel, but that's gonna be a bit much.
Corrugated steel I see a lot too.
What's that called again?
FRP is fiberglass reinforced plastic. And it comes just like a 4x8 sheet like drywall, but it's very thin and it's good stuff to use for building these rooms.
Thank you.
Yeah.
$32 a sheet.
At least, yeah, no doubt. Most expensive drywall you ever did buy.
Worth it.
Guys, I'm working right up on the summary for the questions and answering. Growing can be fun, empowering, therapeutic, can be life-changing, guys. Here at Toledo Indoor Garden, we'd love to share a passion with you. When you're successful, so are we. Let us help you achieve your goals. We really appreciate doing this, guys. Anything that I can do to help or answer any questions. I've been doing this since 2008, so it's going on about 15, 16 years for me doing it non-stop indoors. I've also done tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, and all that stuff outdoors. I'd be willing to share anything with you anytime that I work here 40 hours a week, guys. Very small staff here will help you guys out as well with anything. You guys can call the store, you guys can bring in pictures. We'll look at things under the microscope for you. We'll go all out for you guys. We'll order products we don't have. Just let us know what you need, how you need it. We'll do our best to get it to you, that's for sure. You can look up any of our reviews or ratings, and we're very, very customer savvy, guys. We'll go bend over backwards for you. I'm sure some of you guys already know that.
Yes.
I appreciate you guys. Thank you very much,
Good
guys.
job.
Is there any questions or anything that I can answer? I know I could talk so long about some of these products, guys.
What about companion plants?
Companion plants are awesome. There's definitely like cover crops that you can use. You can grow small grasses and greens. Companion plants are plants that can help harbor good bugs that attack bad bugs. They're plants that can help decrease pest and disease. They can be called banker plants. Sometimes they store good pests that'll keep all the bad ones at bay.
Mess with the root from a cannabis plant in, let's say, a 7-gallon pot?
Sometimes yes, but there's also other companion plants that help the roots.
Like basil, peppermint?
Basil, peppermint, marigolds, but then there's nitrifying plants too. So there's plants that can take nitrogen out of the air we breathe and put it into the root zone. So there's like rye, radishes, any kind of bean can do that as well, legumes. We'll all do that. Companion plants are very, very good. Absolutely. Good question. Say what? Oh yeah. Yep. We'll be doing more classes like this. I think the next one is going to be like organic soil building. We're going to have one for hash extraction in the future. So we're going to try and hit on all these topics. Mushroom, pest and disease prevention, cloning. All these classes are going to be reoccurring coming up
So
too.
the nutrients, will they mess with the living soil?
Sometimes they can. Living soil is a very, very delicate balance. There's very, very delicate microbes, bacteria, and things happening in that soil that are making sure your plants get the right
I got it
nutrients.
going right now, and I got worms in it, and it's not good.
Less is more. I try and stick to less is more. Using compost teas every once in a while are very, very good in
What
organic
about
agriculture.
fermented plant extract?
Awesome. Yep, and they're very new products too, not as researched.
Carry that stuff?
Not yet. I have the ability to buy some though, so if you let me know what you want, I get like peach extract and different things like that.
Excellent.
Oh, yep. Definitely. Yep. Compost teas are great. Not necessarily for nutrients, but for adding microbes and bacteria.
And now I have a question. What if you make Pruno? Could you use it for like flushing?
What is it called?
That's a good idea.
For, you know how they ferment to make wine?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I'm sure you
That
could.
should've worked.
Yeah.
No, I got a million questions, but
You're
the
fine.
flushing part of it, can you actually cover that briefly? Like I know it's like debatable, different
Yeah.
methods and stuff, but like
Absolutely.
I've heard basically just strictly water and like lights off the last 2 days or something like that.
He wants to know a little bit about flushing, and that's super good question. A lot of people have trouble when it comes to this flushing part. Flushing is making sure that you decrease the amount of nutrients that are in your plant, especially when it comes time to smoke it. It creates a good flush product. I have a nice white ash. You'll have a joint that won't go out halfway through burning it. It won't be as choky. It won't be crackly. And some of the ways to do that, especially depending on what you're using for nutrients, what media you're growing in. If you're in an organic environment, a super soil environment, it's almost nothing. You want to appropriate the size of pot with the plant you are. You want to run out of nutrients in the end. You're looking for a fall fade in colors. You want to see purples, pinks, light greens come out in the end. And you want your nutrients to go down at the end. If you're in a cocoa or a soil or you're using bottled nutrients, it's important to, anywhere between that 7 to 10 day period, you're adding a lot of just plain water. You're bringing the conductivity of that soil down. But all in the same aspect, you don't want your plant to run out of nutrients to where the cell walls start to break down. You start to see bud rot. Okay. And so there's a couple things that your plants use all the way up until the end. There's a couple things that your plant should not use all the way up in the end. Calcium, sulfates, magnesium is something that really adds to the taste and smell, really helps the structure of the cell wall. But things like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, stuff like that should be washed out as much as possible. And so, a lot of times just giving a good clean water for a 7 to 10 day period, trying to see it in your plants a little bit to make sure your plants are lightening up. You're seeing some fall colors come out. You're seeing some ripening stages. All that'll help you see that your plants are getting flushed out properly. You could use those EC meters that we use for the nutrient solution going in to test what's coming out the bottom of your plant. And that matters most when you're flushing. You want to bring the EC down below a 1.0 or below 1,000 parts per million more often than not when you're flushing. You want to give it enough water to where you're reading the runoff with the EC meter and it's below that 1.0 number for sure. The lower the number, the better. Flushing is a great thing to do. Just not do it too soon to where you run into things like bud rot and stuff like that. I appreciate everybody's time today, guys. Is there any other questions?
What's the best pot to use?
The best pot to use? There's definitely a few different things out there. There's pre-made pots that already have cocoa in them for you that you could buy, especially if you're in a numbers game. There's those fabric pots that you could buy where the air goes through. You get a better dry back on the fabric pots. They're a little bit harder to use, a little bit harder to saturate because sometimes the water can run out of them. And then there's a regular standard black nursery pot that you can use as well. It's a big preference thing. Know that if you're using a fabric pot, you're going to dry down faster than if you're using a black pot. And that's beneficial sometimes, but if you can't afford to be there to water when it dries down too much, then you go with something, either a thicker soil or you go with a better pot that's going to hold moisture a little bit.
Fabric or plastic?
And that's a great question. It's highly preferential. Fabric costs more money, but a lot of times you get a more even dry back too. So I'm a fan of everything. I am. Fabric works real good. You can't reuse it as many times as you could a plastic one, although you can reuse them. Fabric is, if you're in a small boutique craft grow, I would go fabric pot. If you're in a commercial series, you probably do a standard black one. More economical.
Now, if you're using fabric, how do you clean that?
That's a good question. Power washer, you could beat them outside like a rug, or you could run them through a wash machine too. Stay clean as you can. Yeah. Yeah. Zero tall works good for oxide, works good.
Thank you.
Appreciate all you guys. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Yep.